Hello beautiful people. I'm going to make a real short video of why there's no such thing as weeds. So one of my main things I'm trying to do as a gardener is capture sunlight and turn it into food for myself, the animals that I share this beautiful land with, and all the microbes in the soil. So I know that if sun is hitting soil, like it is right here, then it's not producing food for myself, microbes, or anything. In fact, it's actually killing the soil and killing the microbes in it. So why there's no such thing as weeds are weeds, and let me give you a couple examples of what people might call weeds. You know, here's creeping Charlie. It's considered a weed here, which, funnily enough, it's actually a super delicious edible. But look what it's doing. It's covering all of the ground. And everywhere underneath where creeping Charlie is, the soil is moister, the microbes are happier, and my germination rates of seeds are higher than if the soil was bare and I don't have to water it as much, right? And creeping Charlie isn't really competing with any of the nutrients that any of the plants I'm trying to grow for food for myself are actually providing. Also, the other weeds, you know, like for example grass that would grow in my garden, people might consider it a weed and take all their time ripping it up out of the ground, right? But I can cut it down and put it back on top of the soil, and now it's food for my plants. So I never pull plants out of the earth, right? Because when you do that, you rip the roots out of the ground instead of letting the roots die down. So when you cut plants down, their roots will actually die back, feeding the microbes in the soil and feeding the soil. And then since you haven't ripped the plants out, now you're not exposing the soil to sun. So now you're not killing your soil, and you're still converting sunlight into sugar for the microbes and all the organisms that live in the soil, right? So what you're seeing here and why there's so many, quote, weeds in this particular garden is this was a very, very mistreated patch of earth, and we're only a few months into restoring it. So we've let all the pioneer species, is actually what these early plants are called. So what a lot of people are, fighting against when you can call them weeds are actually pioneer species. They come into the most damaged, degraded, abused lands. They grow aggressively because they're trying to heal that land. So a lot of people are spending a lot of time and a lot of effort fighting the plants that are trying to heal the earth, and they're not very successful because the pioneer species, they're very aggressive because they're very good at their job. So we kind of get in this endless arms race fighting these types of plants that are really, really good at growing. But instead of, ripping them out of the ground, what I might do is say, actually, look, I got some bare soil right here. So why don't I cut down some of this vine right here? Let me show you how to do that. Actually, I'm just going to do it because I only have one hand. So what I've done is I just taken my gardening knife, cut a little bit of that plant, and then put it down to cover and feed the soil where there is a blind spot there. So that's my main goal, is to make sure that none of the soil is exposed, that I'm feeding it, and that's making healthier soil for a healthier garden. So let me give you one more example here. Say you have a big, quote, weed, a plant you don't know what it's supposed to do, which is really all weeds are. Weeds are just plants that are misunderstood. We don't understand them, so we classify them as weeds. But if we really dive in to understand and observe what that plant is doing, soon we find out it's super beneficial and it's not a weed after all. But either way, let's say you have a plant you're calling a weed. Let's say it's this one, and it's really big, right? It's growing next to a plant you do care about. Maybe say this is a zucchini plant, right? When I cut this back, which is I'm about to do in a second, the roots will release signals that tell all the plants around it to grow faster. So now all of these, quote, weed plants that you have growing next to your food plants that you want to eat, they're actually tools that can make your food plants grow faster. And then in addition, when you do cut it back, not pull it out of the ground, but just cut back some of it, then you take the part you cut back, put it at the base of the food that you want, and now it's feeding the microbes which are going to feed your plant. So in this way, literally every single plant that's growing in your garden serves a purpose. Whether you planted it there, or the birds planted it there, or the wind planted it there, or something else planted it there, everything's a gardener in this sense. Everything has a purpose. But if it's not something that you particularly want, and you don't necessarily know what it does, then feel free to cut it back and put it at the base of the plants you do care about. And if you have areas that would otherwise be exposed to the sun and there's, quote, weeds growing in it, just leave them alone. Never expose your soil to sunlight. That is the exact opposite of anything we're trying to do. We want to capture 100% of sunlight and turn it into food for ourselves and the beings around us and the plants in the soil, or in the microbes in the soil rather. And every single plant that's capturing sunlight is feeding the microbes in the soil. Every single one of them. So it is much, much better to have a whole bunch of creeping Charlie covering your soil than it would be to otherwise have it bare, like the soil was here before I covered it up with some, grasses that I cut back. So that's a real quick on why there's no such thing as weeds. Stop weeding. Stop with a ridiculous effort of fighting the pioneer species, which a lot of pioneer species, they don't like healthy soil anyway. That's not their role. They'll disappear once the soil gets healthy enough. So if you just keep working on increasing the health of your soil, feeding that soil, putting in a whole bunch of diversity of the plants you do want, then eventually they'll just go away. You don't have to fight them. And or if they don't go away, then very likely they're a really great plant and you should learn what they do because you might be really surprised by them. Dandelion is a beautiful example that I love. Is as a pioneer species, when it's coming into degraded land, the leaves taste terrible. I hate them. They're not really great. Early pioneer type dandelion, not great. However, once the soil starts getting healthier and it starts maturing and you have a healthier ecosystem, the dandelion leaves, they're fantastic. They're super nutritious and I love them. So that's one type of species that actually kind of evolves or changes its properties. Rather, it's able to take more nutrition from the soil to make healthier leaves is really what's going on as your ecosystem matures. So this video is really designed to say there's no such thing as weeds. Completely remove that concept. Stop weeding. The effort of ripping plants out of the ground and exposing soil to sunlight, that is just complete blasphemy to me. And it hurts my soul to think about because exposed soil to me is like an open wound on our bodies. And it's the same as the earth. The earth doesn't want open wounds, which is why it keeps trying to fill it with these pioneer species to heal. So truly our act of weeding, pulling weeds out of the ground is like ripping off our scab over and over and over because the scab is ugly and we don't want it. So it's that level of consciousness I think we're still applying when we're, quote, weeding. So this is my plea to stop weeding. It's not serving anyone. And instead start to understand what plants are doing. And at a very minimum, just cut the plants back that you don't want, feed them to your other plants, cover bare soil, grow soil health. It's a lot less effort. The amount of time I spend mulching, which is cutting plants back, versus what I used to spend weeding before I learned all of this, it's 95% less. And I get way more benefit out of it. So anyway, long story short, stop weeding, grow abundance. And like I showed you here, this was a completely bare spot of entirely abused soil, not only about 5 months ago. And it's now provided me a ton of food. It's still in recovery stages. There's still, quote, a lot of weeds in here as the land is starting to heal. And next year, this is going to be way more abundant and vibrant as the soil's had some time to recover. Versus, say, the healing holes that I were able to put in, which were really great soil to begin with. Took a lot of care to make sure these were great. And you can check out some healing hole videos if you want. And you can see the density of plants you can start growing and how plants don't really compete with each other. So the final amendment here is the whole concept of plants competing is just as broken as the idea that a restaurant is competing with a doctor's office is competing with a movie theater. They're not competing with each other, and in fact they might actually benefit each other by being next to each other, right? A movie theater out in the middle of nowhere isn't going to be as successful as a movie theater surrounded by the doctor's office, grocery store, and all the other buildings. So if we think of our plants as the same thing as the buildings of the ecology of the ecosystems that we're a part of, then we actually want an incredible diversity of plants right next to each other, right on top of each other, and that creates a healthier environment for them, for the microbes that are living in the soil, and for all life on our planet. So maybe this was really helpful. Maybe this encourages you to stop with that arduous task of ripping plants out of the ground. And when you do that next time, just think about it. Are you going to rip that scab off your cut? Are you just going to keep taking it off because it's ugly? You don't like the way it looks? Or are you going to wait for it to heal and wait for that scab to fall off all on its own? All right, beautiful people. There's why there's no such thing as weeds in under 10 minutes.